2024 might go down as the single greatest year for JRPGs ever. Yes, there were a lot of remakes, but also a lot of fantastic original games in all shapes and sizes, which made putting together this list of 10 particularly difficult. For the first time ever, I'll be doing an honorable mention section because there were just way too many great games to not give them all their proper recognition. What are some of your favorite JRPGs from 2024? Drop a comment down below. I'd love to read everyone's favorites. But for now, let's start at number 10 with a game that flew under everyone's radar, and that's Megaton Musashi W Wired. It's really sad to see how far level 5 has fallen in terms of sales and relevancy since their heyday in the PlayStation 2 era, but they still make amazing games like Megaton Musashi, and they deserve to be recognized. Now, this is an action RPG where you pilot giant robots called rogues and you fight back against an invading alien force. Now, the game is very much like Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, where it's kind of quest-based, you have these short missions, but really intense, fun action. And there's also lots of customization for your rogues, maybe too much. At one point, I just had so many parts I didn't even know what to do with them all. And also, there's a shockingly dark story once you understand and learn what's really going on. Not to mention a really cool visual art style. I love the sort of like 2D characters walking around this 3D environment, and then just the way you can customize your robots. It can look so different depending on how you want to customize it. Not to mention a really addictive game loop. You pick a mission, go out, get engaged in some really fun action combat, get new parts for your rogue, customize them, and then just do it again and again for dozens of hours. I will say, however, it was a little easy at some point. I put on some of the worst gear possible just to make the game challenging, but it was still fun. It's a shame that Level 5 didn't market this game at all either until way after release, because it deserved way more love than it got. I mean, I tried to do my part with a couple of streams and mentioning it in this video here. So if this looks interesting at all, definitely check it out. It's well worth whatever it's asking for in terms of its price. Oh my god, is hell freezing over? Taylor included a Saga game in his top JRPGs of the year. Well, if you recall my Saga series video, I did enjoy Romancing Saga 2 the most, and this remake fixes all my problems I had with that game and transforms it into something amazing. Gone is the aimless wandering of the original version. Now you're guided and all your choices are clearly laid out in front of you. And I think the core mechanic to this game, the inheritance system, is so cool. Basically, after certain points in the story, time will skip and you have to elect a new king or queen. And then all your other party members are basically the children of your previous party members, and they keep going on and on down the line. And by the end of the game, you're going to be hundreds of years into the future. Now, that was one thing I didn't particularly like, because you can't really get too attached to any particular character because they're going to be gone within a few hours. Here, it's really all about the gameplay, but thankfully, it's really fun. The basic loop of the game is something like this. You make a choice on who you want to help or which kingdom you want to go in, and you do that, then you upgrade your kingdom, you add some sort of park or some kind of building to upgrade your kingdom, go out to a dungeon, complete it, rinse and repeat over and over. It's just a really fun loop. Now, the original combat system was pretty good, but they updated it with an even better one. You have a party of up to 4 characters, and you can always see whose turn it is. Like, you can see the turn order, and it'll also show you, like, if you pick a certain move, where and how it will change the turn order. And also, it's kind of like Octopath Traveler, where once you hit an enemy's weakness, it'll just show up so you know what enemies' weaknesses are. And each character can equip a few weapons, and you can mix and match them for a huge variety of basically character building types. And it was really fun to mix and match and try all these different characters and see what kind of party you could build. But honestly, the simple act of just exploring these dungeons was really fun. They're fairly linear, but very rewarding. It would have been higher if not for the story and characters not having a real through line, which is pretty important to me in JRPGs, but nonetheless, it's still a really incredible game from top to bottom that I enjoyed. Now, I'm sure most of you are surprised to see Metaphor ReFantazio this low on the list, but let me explain. For the first like 30 or 40 hours, I was really into this game. I loved the story setup, the combat was fantastic. However, I just didn't really connect with any of the characters. I was kind of waiting for the story to turn a corner or one of the characters' social links to like really grab me, but it never really did. And as good as the game looks, I feel like its UI is a little too flashy, especially in combat. Like anytime you change whatever you're selecting, it like is constantly flashing, and it got a little irritating after a while. And then once I got past that 30 to 40 hour mark, I just didn't care about what was happening in the story, didn't care about any of the characters, and for the first time in one of these games that has a calendar, I felt like it was really restrictive. For example, once you beat the dungeon and you have a lot of these free days, you can go to these side dungeons. However, it takes a few days to get there. And what happened to me quite a few times is I would take a few days to go there, but then I was really underleveled to the point where like I can't even fight the basic enemies in that dungeon. And so I'm wasting all these days just to go back. Now, it sounds like I hate the game, but I really don't. There's a lot to like here. Like I said, the actual art style when it's just kind of just sitting there and you can enjoy it is fantastic. The combat system is incredible. The archetype system is basically a job class system where you can mix and match these different job classes and equip different abilities onto your characters. It was really, really fun and honestly essential to dive into that and really experiment. Overall, Metaphor is a great game. I'm so glad it got so many awards at the Game Awards recently. I respect what it had to do, and I'm glad that it's a brand new franchise. I mean, we don't get a ton of those these days, and obviously it saw a lot of success. It was one of the best-selling Atlas games of all time. I just didn't love it as much as other people did, but I'm really curious to see where they take this series into the future. Ys has quickly become one of my favorite gaming franchises. I love its mix of action combat, rockin' music, and unique mechanics that it brings to each game. However, with Ys 10 Nordics, I felt like it was kinda the first step back in the series. I love the character swapping combat of the last handful of games, but here you only have 2 characters, and I wasn't a big fan of that. To me, the combat was very block heavy, and it kinda got stale because you only have 2 characters. And also, I feel like the game really overtold its story. There was so much exposition in the first handful of hours, and those first handful of chapters are agonizingly slow, both metaphorically and literally. I mean, just look how slow I'm going in my ship. That all said, this game does a lot of great things, and it's really fun. I mean, the moment-to-moment combat is really, really great. I love swapping between the characters, and you can also combine and attack with each other at the same time, which is kind of unique. I've never really seen a game where you can do that. And the ship gameplay is excellent. I love just sailing around, exploring, picking up sunken treasures, getting into ship battles, filling out the map to 100%. And my favorite are probably the island storming battles where there's these islands that you're attacking and then you jump onto the island and take out a base. It's really fun. However, during my time playing the game pre-release, there was a bug where I couldn't complete the map 100%. I got to 98%, so that left me a little bit salty. Ys 10 continues the series staple of having great music. You know, nothing along the lines of Ys 8, but still fantastic. And the unique mechanics they brought here were the mana abilities, the mana string and the mana ride. So mana string sort of serves as like a grappling hook. You can swing from different pieces. I love games that give you unique movement mechanics, and you can also like attach to enemies and propel yourself close to them, which was fun. And then mana ride is like this little surfboard. You're surfing on the ground, and there were certain parts where it was almost like a set piece, but those were very far and few between. I wish there were more of those. However, that said, there is going to be an enhanced re-release coming out in Japan next year called Proud Nordics, and they did say that in that re-release they're going to add mana ride races, so that's cool. I'm excited to see what those are. And even though that just got announced and we pretty much just got Ys 10 Nordics here in the West, I'll be there day one for Proud Nordics. I'm excited to see what they change and add. And overall, this is a really fantastic game, and if you love the Ys series and you love action RPGs, it's definitely worth having in your collection. I'm a huge strategy RPG fan, and I was so thrilled that a game like Unicorn Overlord not only came out in 2024, but found massive success. Now, it's not like most strategy RPGs where it's grid-based and turn-based, but here it's real-time action, kind of like Ogre Battle, the classic strategy RPG series. Now, when I first saw it in trailers, it was really confusing. I wasn't exactly sure how it would play, but after trying out the demo, I was addicted right away. One of my favorite parts was recruiting all the new characters. Like basically after every map, you get a new character for the first handful of chapters. And that was really fun to build out my squads as I was leveling them up and could add more characters to each squad. So it was fun to kind of throw them in there, see what they did and see how it matched with my playstyle. And slowly completing each map and finding everything in there was so addictive. I loved doing every single little battle, finding the hidden treasure chest, finding all the little hidden areas all around, upgrading the buildings and the towns so you could do better things, get better equipment. It was just so addictive. And at a certain point in the game, however, it became a little too easy. I kind of just destroyed every battle in my way, but the journey to get there was really fun and really compelling. Plus, the game has that signature Vanillaware art style. It's back, it looks better than ever, and I love just seeing each new character that would join my team because there were so many unique character designs, and I just loved recruiting all of them. Now, it's a shame that Vanillaware games aren't on PC because I feel like they would thrive there, but that said, they do run really well on console, look amazing on consoles, and if you haven't checked this game out already, there's a massive demo that you can try for free, and it carries on into the final game, so I would say it's definitely worth trying out. Now, before we get into the top 5, I do want to go through my honorable mentions. And the first is Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. Now, unfortunately, at the beginning of the year in 2024, there were so many games that came out at the same time. And this was one that slipped through the cracks and I just had to skip. But everything I've heard from friends that have played it and from reviews makes it seem like it's amazing. Plus, it has this cool new Hawaiian setting, tons of new gameplay. So if you like the Yakuza series or you just love huge, addictive worlds in RPGs, then it seems like this is one you definitely want to check out. Now, one game I did play through was Trails Through Daybreak, and I just barely missed the cut. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of the Trails games. They're really verbose in their story. I just don't really like the stories in these games. However, with Daybreak, it introduced this new hybrid combat system that was really, really cool. Basically, you could go between action or turn-based on the fly. Now, you do have to do turn-based in the boss battles, but other than that, you could kind of choose, which was really fun. And that was something that even Metaphor added to their gameplay. It also looks really great. It has fantastic music, and outside of the very first game in the series, Trails in the Sky, it's the next best entry point. So if you like the Trails games, I'm sure you already played it. And if you haven't, you definitely need to check it out. Now, there was no game I wanted to love more than Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes. It does so much right. I mean, it has that great 6-party combat system. Recruiting all the different characters was really, really fun. The town building system was fun. I loved the feeling of progression. The music was great. The visuals were great. However, it's just intentionally old school in a lot of ways that really annoyed me. The first thing was that it was pretty stingy with save points, even more so than classic JRPGs. I mean, almost every classic JRPG let you save on the overworld, but not here, and not every town had a save point, so there were times where I found myself going hours in between save points, which felt risky. There's also pretty high random encounter rates, not to mention you run so slow. Now, I get that you can add an item that lets you run faster, but that takes up an item slot and that feels like a waste. Not to mention, I feel like there's features locked behind assist characters that I feel like should have just been features in the game, not tied to characters, so that was pretty annoying as well. And also, there's no ambient sound in the game. There's no like footsteps or wind blowing through grass or people talking in a busy town. It's very strange that there's no sound effects, so I don't know why that is, but it was pretty unsettling. Now, I hope they take all this feedback for the sequel because I know this game did pretty well, but I hope they do that and make it more modern so more people can enjoy it. Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance is an enhanced re-release of SMT5 with tons of new story, new ways you could explore the world, new demons, and so much more. Not to mention, it's finally on consoles besides Nintendo Switch, so it runs and looks better. Having this in 60 frames per second was amazing. So if you played the first one, it's totally worth playing again for the new story and all the new enhancements. But if you haven't played it already, definitely give it a try. And last of the honorable mentions is Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake. Now, this was one I didn't play because it seemed way too old school for my liking. Basically really grindy and not a lot of story. But for those that did play it, they said they loved it. So if you love classic JRPGs like old school Dragon Quest games, it seems like this is an excellent one. It looks great, it sounds great, and Dragon Quest 1 and 2 remakes are going to be coming later in 2025. So weirdly enough, 3 is the beginning of this trilogy timeline-wise, so if you want to get going on it, seems like a great one to jump into. Now, I never grew up with the Mana series, but I fell in love with it playing the Trials of Mana remake back in 2020, and Visions of Mana expands on that game, but in so many big, beautiful ways. The first, obviously, is the world. It is gigantic. There are so many huge zones to discover and explore. I just loved finding every little chest, fighting the high-level enemies, and collecting all that grizzly syrup. Now, it's kind of funny because I probably collected too much, like I bought everything there was to buy from the vendors, but it was still a fun little addictive thing to do while exploring the world. And also the combat was expanded. There are just way more elements and job classes for each character, and you can kind of mix and match them with different abilities. So it was really fun to try different ones with different characters because initially I thought I knew who my main cast was going to be, but then as I got new elements and tried different characters with these different classes, they were characters that I did not expect to be playing by the end of the game. Not to mention, I really enjoyed changing costumes for my characters in RPGs, so it was really fun to see the different costumes each character would have when they changed classes. At the beginning, the combat did feel a little bit slow, but by the end of the game, I eventually found classes that felt really good. And can we just talk about the art style in this game? My God, this was one of the most gorgeous games of the year. Like going into some of those big open zones and just exploring these gorgeous environments, like man, it really took my breath away. All the character designs are great. All the cities are cool. So if you love just exploring big, beautiful worlds, this one is just waiting and begging to be explored. Not to mention a fantastic soundtrack. It's very light lighthearted. It has that fantasy whimsy that you just expect from a lighthearted fantasy adventure, and I really enjoyed it. Now, I was kind of hoping this would have been higher on the list, but for me, the story just didn't hit like I wanted to. The setup was good. There was a really interesting twist, kind of in the first third of the game, but then I feel like it really didn't stick the landing, and I didn't like how the story ended up. And it's also a real shame that the studio ended up closing. However, the director did end up joining Square Enix after, so hopefully that's a good sign that we can get more Mana games in the future, because if this is what they have in store, I'll eat it up every single time. For years, the original version of Fantasian was stranded on iOS, and for anyone that played it, they knew that there was something special with that game, and we all hoped for a console port. Because the original minds behind Final Fantasy, the original director Hironobu Sakaguchi, and the longtime composer Nobuo Uematsu worked on this game. And I'm so glad Square Enix decided to step in to help publish this game, along with adding some welcome enhancements like voice acting, a lower difficulty mode, and other enhancements to make the game more playable. But to me, what I enjoyed most about this is it just felt like a PS1 era Final Fantasy game, but with modern design. You have this really interesting turn-based combat system where you can kind of aim attacks, like either in a big area of effect, or you can curve attacks or shoot them in a straight line. It was really fun to kind of figure out how to hit enemies. And one of the coolest innovations I've seen for a turn-based combat system maybe ever is the Dimension system. Basically, as you're walking around, you have random encounters, but you don't fight them right away. They get sent to this thing called the Dimension, and once they build up to either 30, 40, or 50, depending on how much you've leveled it up, you then can challenge all the enemies at the same time. And it makes it much more fun because you can have up to like 10, 15, 20 enemies on the battlefield at once. But because of the way the battle system works, where you curve and aim attacks, you can just take them all out at a bunch at the same time. And it made grinding much more enjoyable because of that. And also the environments look and feel like pre-rendered backgrounds from the PS1 era. I just love that look. And what they are here are real dioramas they made in real life and scanned them into the game, and they look incredible. It almost feels like action figures coming to life, and they're just walking around these dioramas. And the world itself kind of has this Final Fantasy VIII vibe, as it's sort of this like neo-future vibe with all the machines and kind of juxtaposed to the more fantasy towns. I just loved it. It looked really cool. Not to mention that Uematsu's score, oh my gosh, it has all his signature flares. Like, you can just hear it and it sounds like a Final Fantasy game. You know, all the layered instruments in each song, very melodic. I just loved listening to the tracks. Now, for the game itself, it was very linear in the first half and not that difficult, and that was my favorite part of the game because you got a lot of good story. You're going to all these really cool different towns, and while the second half is still good, it's almost like a totally different game. It's not linear at all. It really opens the world up. You can kind of explore and take on these different quests in whatever order you want, and I really fell down the rabbit hole of doing all the side quests, doing all the elemental trials, getting the best weapons, unlocking people's growth path to unlock everything. And I played with a guide because I heard the second half was really challenging, and I didn't think it was that hard with the guide, obviously, but to me that felt like being a kid again, playing with my strategy guide and, you know, just trying to do everything I can and unlock every little secret before I beat the game. And as someone that fell in love with JRPGs during the PS1 era, this game made me feel incredibly nostalgic, and I just loved every second of it. Now, I have a confession to make. I never beat Persona 3. I got to the final boss and I just could not beat them. I tried over and over again, but because in the original Persona 3 on PlayStation 2, you can't control your party, not to mention this really annoying fatigue mechanic, so you couldn't grind for a long time. So it just made the game pretty hard. But this remake fixes this and so much more. Obviously, the update to modern visuals and that signature Persona flair is amazing. I loved all the UI elements, all the menus. It looks fantastic. And being able to explore this world in fully 3D and not just be a little dot like you are in the PSP version is fantastic. And they did their best to make Tartarus more tolerable. Obviously, it's still very bland and pretty boring for a place that's most of the game, but they did their best and I appreciate everything they added to it. I also found it to be a lot easier. I feel like I didn't need to grind as much, and I never really had too much trouble on any of the bosses. Plus, I feel like I had a lot of extra days by the end of the game. Like, I had already maxed out all the social links that I wanted to. I was already pretty high level, and so I kind of just found myself skipping days just to finish the game. And that Persona game loop, man, does it hold up. It is so addictive. I just loved getting into the dungeons, finishing them as fast as possible, interacting with the social links, getting to know my friends and all these other characters around the school. It was just so much fun. Not to mention the remix soundtrack, and the new voice cast was pretty much perfect. I mean, everyone sounds like the old cast. However, the only one that sounded off to me was Akihiko. That just did not match the character at all. That was really the only one that I feel like they missed based on. But overall, Persona is my favorite gaming series, and I'm happy to get an amazing remake to a game like this that I never finished and more people get to enjoy. And man, if this is what they're going to do with Persona remakes, I can't wait to see what they do with the inevitable Persona 4 remake, because that's my favorite game of all time, and I'm sure it's going to be amazing. We had to wait so long for Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, and in my opinion, it absolutely delivered. But it wasn't exactly what I or many people expected. It's not a traditional JRPG, but more quest-based and set-piece heavy. Think Monster Hunter meets Uncharted. And I love both of those franchises, so to wrap that all up in a JRPG coat of paint was right up my alley. And what I also loved is that the main story is not that long, maybe 12, 14 hours, depending on how long it takes you to finish it. But each story quest was so wildly different that it never felt repetitive. It was like all killer, no filler. At the beginning, it seems pretty simple, like, okay, we're just killing monsters, fighting big bosses, but then you go to fight these big Titan-like enemies where you have to climb up the Titan to destroy it. You storm an airship in the middle of the sky, and so many other cool ones that I don't want to spoil if you haven't played the game. And then after the credits roll, you can just keep playing it like a Monster Hunter game. Like, there's so many more bosses and enemies that unlock. You get parts to get better equipment, and then you keep doing it again and again for dozens of hours. But what's amazing about this game was the amount of characters that you can play. There's like over 20, and they're all very different, all have really unique mechanics. And they even added more post-launch, I think like 3 or 4 more after the game came out. But the one I ended up playing with most was Fairy. She has this whip, and she can summon these magical ghost animals to fight alongside her. So just her kind of combat loop was really fun and addictive for me. Not to mention an absolutely incredible presentation. That art style translates really well to a big 3D AAA RPG. It just looks incredible. I love this world. I love going to every little corner of it. It runs great at 60 frames per second, at least on PS5 and PC, and it has a really incredible soundtrack. Now, I know it initially sold well, over 1 million copies, but I don't know what Cygames had for it in terms of expectations, but I hope it sold well enough for them to get their money back, make a little bit of profit, and hopefully get a sequel, because I would be there day one if they decide to make a sequel. And really, that only leaves one game, and I'm sure you could probably guess what it is for my game of the year. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is one of the greatest games I've ever played. I lost count of how many times I said to myself while playing this game, how is this game real? The scope, production value, and quality are unlike anything I've seen before, especially for only being made in like 3.5, 4 years. That's incredible in this modern day of game development. And all this for a game that reimagines one of my all-time favorites, made for a truly special experience for me. Every time I got to a new location, I wanted to explore every corner of it to see how it had changed and how it had stayed the same. No section failed to impress me, except maybe the lame Shinra Mansion section with Cait Sith. Like, that was pretty terrible. And each zone was brimming with fun activities and unique mini games. I loved exploring the world, getting the new chocobos, filling out the world map, and getting all the different little collectibles. And some people said the mini games were overkill, but I feel like mini games have been missing from Final Fantasy for a really long time, so I welcomed it. Not to mention Queen's Blood, the card game. Man, I fell down that rabbit hole hard, totally completed that quest and beat the final boss, so that was fun. And man, that music, holy crap, that has got to be one of the best gaming soundtracks of all time, well deserving of winning Best Music this year at the Game Awards. But I think what really cements this as my game of the year is just all the emotions it made me feel. I don't know if there's a better cast of characters in any video game. Like, they felt so alive and real in this game. And there's so many other games that have good stories, and they're fun and they get you playing and get you to the end. But I don't know the last time I've had a video game move me in the way like Rebirth did. I just went through every emotion of joy, sadness, anger, frustration, confusion. It's rare for a game to do that, and Rebirth did it amazing here. Simply put, it's my game of the year for 2024 and one of my favorite games of all time. Now, these were my 10 favorite JRPGs of 2024, but there were also a lot of really cool and unique hidden gem JRPGs that you might have missed in 2024. So to check those out, be sure to watch this video right here.